Welcome to the Nomiki show. I am Nomiki Const. I don't know what day of quarantine we are on at this point. Last week has been very difficult for the progressive community. We lost our brother, our comrade, our ally, Michael Brooks. It was a very sudden and unexpected passing. He had a medical issue that he was unaware of and his family was unaware of, and he was taken from us suddenly. And so for the last week, many of us have been grappling, trying to process. We've been numb. He was a friend. We talked to him a lot. We laughed with him a lot. We worked with him. The community at the Majority Report, which I am very grateful to be a part of, newly a part of, they have been dealing with some very tough times. And of course, Michael Brooks' own show, which is normally housed out of the studios that we are housed out of in Brooklyn for the Majority Report. His show, his team, they're all struggling. Nobody could ever imagine such a brilliant, thoughtful, genuine, kind, funny, sometimes tough, committed person to this movement being taken from us at such a young age before we were just getting started. So this show we've done some tributes already through live shows and live stories, and Sam Cedar and the Majority Report did a tribute, and Jacobin has done some tributes. The tributes are beautiful, and everybody has shared their personal experiences with Michael, revealing sides of him that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And his family has even come out, his sister, and shared her reflections on Michael. And it takes such courage because his partner, his parents, his sister, we really want to send our love and support to them, as well as Sam Cedar and the whole team at the Majority Report, and especially the Michael Brooks show. So today's show, I wanted it to be a little bit more personal, and I called a friend of mine from earlier days in the movement who recently launched a podcast with Michael through Jacobin, Anna Kasparian. And Anna and I are going to talk about Michael, his work, how we can live on his legacy, just reflections on his life. We want to honor this space. We want to honor this time. We want to honor him and process, because I can only speak for myself, but it's not real yet. I don't know if it ever will be. So for you guys who I'm sure loved him, were reading these stories and anecdotes, seeing pictures and videos about your experiences with him, and seeing other thinkers and writers and activists and leaders share their stories about him, they're touching. And I think what I can do is create a space to honor him so that we can all get through this together. So on today's show, we're going to do a conversation with Anna Kasparian, just talking about Michael. And that's it. That's, there's a lot to Michael's life that I don't know how we can summarize it in the show, in weeks of shows, but all I can say is I urge you to go to his show and watch his produced content. He was so intentional and thoughtful and dedicated to producing the highest quality content. And if there's one thing I just want to say at the start of the show before we move into our interview, I want to express my gratitude to Michael. I regret not doing that in person. Our show would not have launched without the support and guidance from Michael. And I think my life in this form, this is a personal message, but I have shifted how I focus on life, how I do my work, what I want to contribute to the world. based on a lot of the advice that Michael shared, and just his reflections on how he lives his life. So for that, I'm grateful to Michael. And I can only say that I hope to be an extension of honoring his legacy, like I know so many of us in the movement will be doing. People who have yet to rise up. Kids in college, kids in high school who came across Michael's work. Boomers, actually. I had some folks reach out to me this week who were not aware of Michael and heard about his passing and researched and watched our show and learned more because they knew me from past work. And so he has inspired more people since he's passed, and that's a tragedy. But I think it's on us to take lessons from Michael's life and take our work to the next level to honor him, because there is a space that is not being filled. And it was a great space, it was a great future, and it was a great life. Thank you.
Civvy is an app that helps you find the politicians that best align with your beliefs. Whether quarantining at home alone or with family, it's as if it were the holidays. Gone are the days of no politics at the dinner table. We talk about our positions and express our support of politicians that we believe support our ideals. But in truth, how can we be sure that they actually do? There is a lot of noise out there. And recently, it feels like our assumptions about the world are being challenged every day. Civvy is an app here to help you navigate the world of information around you, to help you better grow, develop, and understand your political leanings and where you fit in today's political landscape. Their algorithm fills the content based on your stances, shows you leaders who actually match your values, and independent media to help keep you informed. The more you use it, the better it grows. Find Civvy on iTunes today. Recently, Michael, who was always coming up with new ideas and actualizing them, and such a big thinker, he launched, in conjunction with Jacobin, a podcast called Weekends with Anna Kasparian and Michael Brooks, and it was just getting started, and it was fantastic to listen to, and I urge you, if you haven't already, to go back and listen to past episodes. But I could not be more grateful to have Anna Kasparian, who is, of course, host and executive producer at The Young Turks, former colleague of mine. If I can say, I think I look up to you, even though I think I'm older than you. So
sweet.
Thank you for joining me and for, this is very hard for, I think, everybody. And so I just want to say thank you for being willing to talk about this, because I think folks are looking for a place to go and to mourn those who knew him and those who watched him. So I guess I'm just going to start with asking you, how did you meet Michael?
So, I met Michael, he came in and did an episode of the main show for TYT with me, and I think he was on a panel. And I just remember thinking like, oh, this guy's cool. He's smart. And he gave me a great impression. But one thing that I actually don't really share publicly often, or maybe I haven't shared it publicly at all, is that since 2016, I've been incredibly guarded with people that I happen to encounter in this profession, because in an earlier time, I was very open and became very good friends with people who then, in a very public way, betrayed me and went off and lied about TYT. Yeah. And I just started realizing, and it was incredibly painful to go through that. And, Dave Rubin is the prime example. But there were other instances with other people, which I don't want to get into because I don't want to feed into that toxicity. And so when I first met him and did a show with him, I really liked him, but at that point I wasn't very open to getting close with anyone. Like, it was just strictly, you're someone that I might cross paths with, maybe host an episode here or there with, but that's it. And then I started to look for comfort in weird ways. So for instance, Sam Cedar and Michael Brooks would dunk on members of the IDW, the intellectual dark web. And they were just so clever and funny about it. And I started to really realize that I connected with Michael on a deeper level. He would talk about things and it would resonate with me in a way that made me feel like I could trust him and I could open up to him. And I just remember one day I sent him a direct message on Twitter, like totally out of nowhere. I'm shocked that he didn't think I was a crazy person because we weren't really close at that point. And I just vented. I vented about something within the industry that is very frustrating to experience and go through. And that started off a more personal relationship, a real friendship. And he was just so warm and so encouraging. And I would talk to him every day. He would text every day. Me, Nando, and Nando Vila, for those of you who might not know, and Michael were on this text group, and on a regular basis, we're sharing articles with each other, sharing our thoughts on something, cracking jokes. And it had become a big part of what got me through each day, right? Just seeing those text messages and remembering that there's good in the world. I have these close friends, even within this industry, that sometimes makes you feel isolated and lonely. And more than anything, Michael was one of the few people who I was constantly learning from, right? Because the incentive structure in media makes it so I feel like people end up covering similar stories or similar nonsense because it performs well and that's how you remain sustainable. But Michael, through his Patreon model was no, I'm going to talk about international relations, foreign policy. And through his coverage of these issues, I constantly felt challenged. And I love that. I love that I was learning new things. The way he would cover certain stories that we covered at TYT certainly challenged me to think about, the story from a different perspective and just be a little more holistic in the way you approach the news. And I just really valued his friendship. I valued his contribution to the world, and I can't believe he's gone. I can't really put it in words. I miss him so much, and I'll find a story or, just see an interview that he did. 'Cause some of his newer interviews are still getting posted. They were pre-recorded. And I would always encourage him too. I would hear an interview where he did such a great job and I would share my thoughts on it and tell him he did a great job, because we need to hear that. We're on air and it might seem like we're all so strong and confident, but we're all very vulnerable at times and we have our own insecurities, and just having someone reach out and encourage you to keep going, which is something Michael did regularly, meant a lot. And now there's this void,
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting because yesterday I saw something and it was the first time. I'm sure many of us who are watching and listening, we've all had death in our lives. This is part of humanity, right? But the human experience. But I had this thing yesterday where I saw an article and I was like, oh, Mike. And it was just, I went to my phone and I can't do that. I can't, to be completely honest, it was just shit on a few people that we would sometimes shit on, like Dave Rubin or that is New York noise, just so you know what's going by. That's my window. For those of you who don't know, we're taping from my apartment. So, it's these strange moments where you sit here and you remember how valuable they were in your life and how he was constantly reminding us, honestly, of what mattered, but also he was a human and he laughed, as we all know, and he didn't take things too seriously at times and was there for us in darker times. And I think that's something I didn't realize until just now. You and I had a similarity with Michael. I said this on the Majority Report the other day, and in a very raw moment, because it was still, very fresh. I said I had been going through a very tough period last year, feeling very isolated and not wanting to, whether I said this on air or not, I don't remember, but not wanting to talk to folks, not trusting anybody because of that, exactly what you said. There are people who will instigate, who are opportunists, and who will take a seed of information, overblow it, or just completely lie. And you, as the person being affected, usually based on legal advice, are not allowed to share your side. And it can be very dark and very hard. And I think as women in this space, you and I probably have both experienced this, and you in your own way, it's dangerous. It's actually extremely dangerous. And Michael, I didn't realize that you had that kind of relationship with Michael. He was offering advice. He despised cancel culture. He despised these people. He was always checking in to see, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And I don't know if that's a part of his legacy that we can maybe in our own little space talk about a bit more, how hard it is being in independent media because we don't have institutions fighting off these folks, but also women. And I know you go through that.
Yeah, definitely. There is, I think that Twitter in particular creates this culture of incentivizing conflict among people who should really be allies. And, before Michael passed, like he and I would talk about this on a regular basis. Like we both hated the toxicity of Twitter. We hated the mob mentality. We both complained about cancel culture, although I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of fear in speaking out against cancel culture because people will twist it in a way to make it appear as though you're an apologist for some of the horrendous things that people say. But no, cancel culture creates, first of all, it perpetuates fear. It creates this vigilante surveillance state where everyone's got their phone ready to catch someone in their worst moment. And, I just wish everyone would just take a step back and think about how they would feel if someone captured them in their worst moment. And we're all humans, we have bad moments. Put that online. And then from here on out, that would be the way that people identify you. That's how you are represented. And you're no longer in charge of your own reputation. You're not in charge of your identity. You're not in charge of any of it. And to what end? I mean, what do you accomplish by doing that to random people? Oftentimes, we're now seeing a lot of private citizens who are caught on camera, in their worst moments, and they get shamed, they get fired, they lose their source of income, which means their family members also lose that source of income. And so does that change the system in any way?
That's right.
Does that create a system where the economic inequalities led by neoliberal ideology, does that change? And it doesn't. I mean, there's a reason why the Nancy Pelosi's of the world latch on to the identity politics and the accusations of racism, sexism, all of that. They don't actually want to do anything to make lives better for Black people in America or for women or for the LGBTQ community. But what they do love is getting into these judgmental mob mentality like movements regarding rhetoric, really, right? And so you'll see the Black Lives Matter murals, which are great. I'm not saying I'm against them. I think they're great. But then what? Are we going to do anything to change the system, right? And Michael was really one of the few people in this space that communicated that critique clearly, effectively, and in a way that luckily didn't lead to people attacking him and accusing him of being some sort of apologist, which is what you see online all the time. So I want to find a way to carry out that mission he had. I want to carry out what he wanted to accomplish. And I've been reflecting a lot on my own behavior and things that I've definitely taken the bait, and I ashamed of that, but at the same time, I want to learn from it and do better moving on.
When you say taking the bait, you taking the bait on the mob mentality provoking you, or taking part in it, or both?
I think taking part in it, you know, without really thinking about the consequences of what I was engaging in. So I have to sit down and have a conversation with like the production team for the main show, because I don't want to cover Karen stories. I
agree.
I think they're wrong, and I think it's doing nothing to benefit anything or anyone in society. We have a huge problem with mental illness in this country, right? And so again, we're judging, in a lot of cases, completely private individuals who are caught on a cell phone video doing something or saying something bad. And does it, like, do we feel better, like ruining that person's life? Do we know their story? Are we sure they don't have a mental health issue? You know, it's part of the reason why I'm not really interested in talking about the Kanye story. He clearly is dealing with something, and, you know, all the incentives to talk about that story are there. The views are going to be there. The money associated with those views will be there. But have I done anything through that conversation to actually better society? No, of course not. And yeah, it feels wrong. And I'm just so proud of who Michael was. And I want to take something from that. I want to learn from that.
It's interesting. I heard someone say in our space, say that for all the complaints we have about cable news shifting their message to accommodate their advertisers, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies or healthcare companies not being for Medicare for all, or not really digging into the costs of war and the forces behind war, because, you know, there are advertisers associated with it. We in the independent space sometimes shift our message to what is actually ultimately a capitalist system that is pushing clicks by the clickbait, which is built off of fear and hate and impulsiveness. And whether it's Twitter, incentivizing, as you said, so well said, this type of response and these fights and these battles, when they could very easily, strategically and thoughtfully say, oh, I can figure out as a company, Twitter, these people aren't real. These folks are paid. It is not hard for them as a company on the back end to figure out why some messages are amplified based on bots and getting retweeted over and over by one person who owns 12 accounts or fake accounts or whatever it is. And suddenly that thing goes viral, and then a reporter picks up on it, and then the reporter is incentivized to cover it. And then it becomes a YouTube segment. And so it's this system, it's all based on another form of capitalism. You have cable news capitalism, and you have independent media capitalism. And we have a decision as independent media hosts, as Michael did, to take part in that. You know, I think at the end of the day, you and I, and Michael knew this very well, could build a strong show that was funded and not take part in the stupid stuff, in the dum-dum,
right,
as he used to say. And so I think that's something that, I personally, and I'll say this right now, I would like to be committed in making sure that we carry that out, that part of his legacy, because you're right. At the end of the day, you know, it's not worth it. This is not what it's about. I haven't said this publicly, and I'm glad that you said it publicly, that the Karen behavior, yes, it's despicable how these folks are acting. But I had this feeling after the 2016 election, when everyone said, and granted, I am white, so I am going to put that out there right now, but when they blamed white women for the election, but when you looked at the numbers, sorry, that's not who influenced the election. You had a demobilized working class base that was not being spoken to, a diverse demobilized working class base that did not show up in the numbers because they weren't invested in or spoken to or didn't believe in the candidate's message. And ultimately, those white women that they blamed have historically, and there have been studies behind this, voted with their husbands because of patriarchy. So I see these Karen, they're horrible and they're sad and they're a depiction of problems that we have to address, but it's not by canceling these individuals. You know, Martin Luther King used to say shame is a powerful tool. He didn't say shaming public citizens. You know, it was about public figures. not about individual citizens. And I think you're right. I think it's not part of the big picture that he was focusing on. It's not intentional. So
yeah, he said something, and I noticed that people have made memes out of it, and I don't mean memes as like something silly. It's a quote of his where he says, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty accurate, something along the lines of "Be brutal to institutions and kind to individuals." Right. And really, that's something that I want to live by, because being brutal to one person, right? Like what? And I get it. Like there is so much anger and frustration, resentment. Everyone feels that. I feel that. And I'm not going to lie in that sometimes, going after a specific person in the short term, very short term, could feel a little good, right? You feel like you're doing something, but you're really not. You're actually like playing into what the Nancy Pelosi's and the Mitch McConnells want, because behind the scenes, they're still getting paid and they're doing nothing for us, right? And so it's really this whole divide and conquer strategy that's as old as time and continues to be utilized against working people, not only in this country, but throughout the world.
That's right.
And one message that Michael really had, and I now understand it with such clarity, is that we need to find common ground. We need to unite as working people and push forward for a better society, because we might not all come from the same religion. We might not have the same background. We might have some differences here or there, but there is this one major issue that unites so many of us, and it's the economic injustice. It's the incentives that have been forced upon us by capitalism, right? And so we're not going to win if we become these annoying little brats on Twitter who bitch about Joe Rogan or whoever. Who cares? Who cares? All right. It doesn't matter. None of this crap matters. The only thing that matters is uniting to fight the elite class. That's it.
That's right.
And doing that effectively improves the lives of all of us, regardless of your background, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation. It improves so many people's lives, but instead we take the bait. We take the bait from the elite class over and over again.
Yes.
And I'm sick of it. I'm just tired of it. And so is Michael.
It's so crazy. This is where like the universality, I can't, like the cosmic, I'm very spiritual. I know he was, it overlapped with the few weeks leading up to his passing were about cancel culture. This cancel culture letter, I had mentors of mine who've been journalists for 35, 40 years saying like, this is too much. It's just too much now. Like the most sensible, thoughtful journalists were saying we're not taking part in due process as journalists from the journalism space. And we as a community, like I don't know technically how you stop it. 2 days, I'm sharing a personal thing, but 2 days before Michael passed, a friend of mine who worked for us, who is not a public figure at all, shut down her Twitter account and was very deeply, I'll just say very, 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 very deeply and personally affected by a barrage of attacks on her that were not based in reality, and she was sucked into something else. And my conversation with her was really scary, actually. But it led to, how do we put forward legislation to stop this? Because it wasn't based in reality, it wasn't real Twitter trolls. And I had explained to her how the system works, and it was lies and smears, and she was worried that she was never gonna be able to work again because someone was gonna Google it. And I said, no, this is not how it works. But I think what's so interesting about this is like the cancel culture, like the canceling of cancel culture being led by everybody from Noam Chomsky to Barry Weiss, and like that, J.K. Rowling, like that igniting, and then seeing someone very close to me personally attacked to the point where it became like a little bit of a mental health thing, to legislation, and then seeing him pass. And I do think like in the universe, there's something happening, like it's gotta stop. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is. I mean, did he ever talk to you about like what it would take to stop this? Yes.
Yeah, so I was watching one of his post-game shows for the Michael Brooks show. And I had actually already watched that episode, but I liked it so much I went back and listened to it again yesterday. And his producer, Matt Leck, read one of the Discord questions where someone asked, like, look, it's true, you know, the cancel culture stuff is wrong, but what about the fact that people, you know, are really angry and upset? And it's almost like a respite to engage in this stuff, to be part of that, you know, left-wing mob that goes after someone who did or said something that we disagree with. And you know what Michael said? He's like, reject it, reject it. I think that change happens when people, you know, decide that they're going to take ownership of their mistakes, which I'm 100% doing by acknowledging that these Karen stories were in bad taste and didn't actually benefit anyone in covering them, right? And I just refuse to cover them moving forward. And it's not just, I'm giving you that specific example of Karen stories, but you guys get the picture. It's not just about the Karen stories. And he just says reject it, because what we need to do is find that common ground and, again, be ruthless when it comes to institutions, but kind when it comes to individuals, and find ways to have a conversation, right? Like, we've moved so far away from this idea of having a conversation with someone. They might disagree. You might not change their mind in that moment, but you plant a seed. And the thing is, you're not going to plant the seed if you outright reject that person, isolate them, demonize them, antagonize them. That's not going to help anyone. You're not going to persuade them of anything. And you're going to feed into exactly what the elite class wants. And so, you know, I think one thing that I really want to do is somehow get left media, independent media hosts and producers, people who have some platform, some voice, together. And maybe we make a pledge, right? And number one in that pledge, in my opinion, should be, let's stop publicly attacking one another. It's stupid. And we all know why it happens, right? It's just, anyway, it's because it leads to attention, and more attention means more clout. We all know that. And I've always hated that. But that's the first part of the pledge. The second part is, let's be ruthless to systems, and let's not take the bait. Let's not, you know, and it's hard. I get it. It's totally hard, especially when you see the financial incentives that come along with covering those viral stories. But look, if I were in this to make money, I wouldn't be at TYT, right? I would be at CNN, where I would actually make money, and I wouldn't have to, just keeping it real, beg our viewers to fund us. I hate that. I can't, but I do it because what are my options? Right. Either I'm funded by the audience and I stay true to my integrity, or I go make a lot more money working for the CNNs of the world, or whatever, mainstream media, where, you know, broadcast can bring in some serious dollars. And so if I've made this decision, then I've got to carry out what the vision is. And the vision is to actually spur change in this country, but more importantly, spur change in the world. It's not just about the United States. And that was one other thing that Michael did a really great job in communicating clearly.
If I could just recognize one more thing to add to our the media host pledge, having each other's backs. You know, I ran for office and I started this organization, Matriarch, with a group of women from all over the country, progressive leaders. And one of the reasons why we started it is we realized how much under attack women are in the progressive space, with very unique forms of attacks. It just started with conversations where, oh, you had that happen to you? Oh, I had that happen to me. But we didn't talk about it because we were told not to talk about it. And there was a pattern of attacks. And we realized, oh, this is part of the capitalist system. They have like an attack book. They have a strategy book, and then they use it. Oh, you're a woman? Okay, we're going to hit you with this. Oh, you did this? Okay, we're going to hit you with this. And they have a set of attacks, like, you know, sometimes they throw it at men, smears, fake stories about Me Too, because they're weaponizing Me Too and minimizing Me Too and ruining Me Too, because, like, that's how they want to get the progressive men. I'm not saying all, just some. And so we started Matriarch because we wanted to build that sisterhood where we have each other's backs when they come after us. And we're not incentivized to do so, because then it also opens you up to be attacked as well. But I think what's different about progressive hosts who have platforms is we have platforms. So at the end of the day, if you're attacked, I have your back. If I'm attacked, you have my back. And we have a lot of, look at how much impact Michael Brooks had. And he was like the #1 trending story on Twitter. And in other countries as well, like Brazil and in Australia, he was trending. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that there was this universe of progressive voices, hosts who are amplifying it, and of course their viewers too. So I don't know. I mean, I think that might be a way to buffer and support each other, because there are very, very, very powerful and well-funded forces out there who want to take down TYT, who want to take down Nomiki Konst, who want to take down the Majority Report, who want to take down Kyle Kulinski, for lots of reasons. And I think it's important for us to all, and Crystal Ball, have each other's backs. So I would love, if I could add one addition, it's the solidarity that I know Michael had.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is kind of incredible, because to add some specificity to what you're saying, I totally agree wholeheartedly. You know, when Cenk was running for Congress, which was one of the most difficult periods I'm sure he's had to go through, but it was hard for me too, because, you know, I know Cenk on a much more personal level. Like, I've worked with him closely for 13 years. So I know who he is as a person, and I know his heart. And I know that he, you know, the biggest thing that I've ever criticized him for is that he's ridiculously forgiving and nice, and people take advantage of it, right? And so when he was running for Congress, unsurprisingly, all of these bad faith attacks happened. They brought up his old blogs again and what he had written, and, you know, they called him a misogynist. They claimed he was like all sorts of ridiculous things. I mean, some of them were so outlandish that I can't believe that anyone would buy it. You know, and so the attacks start that way. And then finally, all of a sudden, there's like this talk of this Twitter page pops up out of nowhere, right? And it's TYT Union, and no one had any idea what that was, or, you know, what's going on? Is this real? And one of the people following that TYT Union page was Nancy Pelosi, who very clearly despises Cenk, and was doing anything and everything possible to get to ensure that Christy Smith would beat him in the Democratic primary. So understandably, like, Cenk's going to be suspicious of that. Like, what is this, and why is Nancy Pelosi following it? And so he brought it up internally, and then it turned into like this ridiculous story about union busting, right? Now, let me be clear. And by the way, this particular union had endorsed Christy Smith. That was already on the record, who, by the way, voted in California against labor rights over and over again. So, like, of course, people who are in the know, who are paying attention, are going to be suspicious. And it turned into a union busting story. And now they're unionized, and we understood, like, by the way, I'm not even in management. I'm an executive producer, which is different from being in management on the business side of things. So I have no say in whether people get to unionize or not. And if the employees want to unionize, they should unionize. And that's what happened. They finally did. And if they're happy, awesome. But the problem that I had with the way that story played out and how it was perceived by people in indie media is that immediately, like, virtue signaling is real. It is real. And so immediately there were few people from indie journalism that I love and I have great respect for, who felt the need to condemn Cenk publicly, right? Because it's the brand play, you know? Oh, I got to make sure that my brand among my leftist audience is squeaky clean. So that means immediately, without asking any questions,
right.
without looking into the story, I'm going to go ahead and condemn Cenk as a union buster. And that really infuriated me, because, hey, how about hit him up? How about call me? How about ask a question or two?
Ask a question, that's right. That's it.
Right. Instead of like, really, you're going to believe the New York Times or CNN or whoever, like the same or media outlets that we're so critical of, you're going to trust them before you go ahead and ask someone you know personally a question or two before, you know, if you want to make a statement publicly, have at it. But like, that was the most painful part, right? And it was very isolating to go through that and see that happen. And that's why I want us to, and by the way, that's not to say that we're always going to agree with one another, right? I'm sure that there are going to be moments where we might disagree, but the difference between the way it's being handled now and the way that I envision that being handled in the future is that we open up discussions internally and we work those issues out because we love each other and we see each other as allies and we want solidarity and we want to actually accomplish something in this country, right? You're not going to be doing that by only worrying about your brand as opposed to thinking about the bigger picture, which is, again, fighting the elite class.
Right. I think you said it well. It's like, if you wanted to take that path and make the money and the clicks, by all means, go join Politico. Go join CNN. Go join any of these places. Go join the New York Post. But if you want to actually make a difference, then make your decision. Am I in it or am I out of it? Which side are you on?
Yeah. And by the way, when that whole thing was going down, Michael reached out and he's like, whoa, like what's going on? And the thing about Michael that always impressed me was that he reserved judgment 100% of the time, 100% of the time. And he didn't engage in like the virtue signaling and, you know, he didn't feel a need to do that.
That's right.
And he asked some questions. He knew what was going on and he was just,
yeah.
I told him at one point, it was on my birthday, actually. He and Nando sent me like a happy birthday text message. And I just told them, like, I have your backs 100%. And I mean it, right? Like, I will never feel the need to appease whoever online by shitting on my friends and allies. They're my friends and allies. And if I ever have an issue with them, I should feel comfortable, and I do feel comfortable talking about it, you know, privately. Yeah. If you feel the need to do it publicly, you're doing it publicly for a reason. And I think that's obvious, you know?
That's well said. It's interesting. Yeah. I'm seeing like patterns in behavior. I don't think maybe we didn't all know that he did these things, like reaching out and asking questions and being thoughtful. We've all been attacked and smeared, unfortunately, being in this space, especially if we were around I can't believe I'm even saying this, 2018. It's like there's a whole new wave of folks now. But yeah, I mean, when I was, he was a big, I said this in my show, my live stream earlier this week, he was a big part of my campaign. And when I say like a big part, I mean, he showed up to everything. He emceed everything. He would do segments on his show telling people, I don't think I've ever seen him do that with anybody. And I just found some of them in the archives, like, wow, I didn't even know because I was running for office. I didn't see any of this stuff. And it just showed how much of a good friend he was. And then when the attacks started coming in, he called me up, and I mean, he knew right off the bat, like, they weren't true. And then he just gave me this space to discuss them. Because the other thing is, people want you isolated. And so it's not just that you don't engage, it's that you just stay quiet. And that's very hurtful to people who are who are your friends. And I think it's amazing that he reached out to you and asked questions. And I hope that, in the future, if that happens, hopefully not, I will be able to do that with you and vice versa, and that we as a community can do that, because that's what a community is. I mean, you know that thing called the blue zones, like the places on the planet where people live the longest? One of the, this is sort of a silly side note, but one of the aspects that all of these little blue zones have in common is community. It's not, some are more vegetarian than others, some do more athletics, whatever it is, but they check in on their elders, they have conversations with their elders, they check in on each other, and they listen and communicate and talk to each other, and just, they're humans, they're good humans. And it's hard in the pace of politics, it's hard in the pace of news, and especially in this world that we're living in right now, to kind of like take a moment and say, what he did. My last text that he sent me was, "How are you doing? What's going on?"
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who did that. I didn't even realize it until other people started sharing it that he did that, and then I saw how many times he did that. He was on another
crazy,
level,
right?
and I don't even think I don't know if you saw it. I don't think I saw it, and I regret that.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say, like, I definitely recognized, that stood out to me about him. What I didn't know was how widespread that was with everyone. And so I actually feel a lot of happiness and comfort reading about people's, experiences with him, and how, I wasn't the only person who had, just this magical relationship with him, where I felt like I had someone by my side no matter what. Like, I love that he was like that with you and with others, that he would check in and help people feel connected and not isolated, And you're right. It is an isolating feeling. Working in this industry and seeing the way people treat one another on social media and the clout chasers and all that stuff. And, even on the night that he had passed, I was on Twitter briefly, and I noticed someone I know wrote something pretty nasty on Twitter about, like, oh, all these people commenting on Michael, called them clout chasers. And I had this urge to, like, that, of course, infuriated. Like, I was angry when I read that. And I wanted to quote tweet her and say something mean. And I was like, okay, well, how would Michael handle this? And he just wouldn't engage, like, just let it go. And I did. I let it go, and I felt a little better about that,
Yeah. I mean, listen, let people mourn how they need to mourn, and it's
Definitely.
a community, and, like, how beautiful it is that every single person was sharing their personal. I mean, you learn through these stories, whether it's somebody who met him at a live show and was inspired to do something in their life and wanted to communicate that. I mean, how comforting is that to his friends and his family to read how much of an impact he had on their lives? And you know what? Screw you, person. Like,
yeah.
It's their insecurity, because that also was clout chasing. It was, like, weird.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the way I think he would approach that, or at least think about it, is, look, you've got to be going through something.
Right.
If that's your first thought, as you see all these people mourning the loss, like the untimely and shocking death of someone who they loved and cared about. If that's your reaction to it, then there's some pain in your own life, right? And so I tried to think about it that way, because it's going to take a lot of discipline to not feel or to not take the bait of the Karen stories, for instance, because those stories anger me. Like, you see those videos and you see, like, the terrible behavior, in a lot of cases, the racist language, and you want to condemn it. But he always approached something from a place of, I guess, empathy. Like, his empathy was out of this world. And so he would always think about the systems that would lead to that kind of thinking, or maybe the terrible experiences that individual might have had that led them to this point in their lives. Like, always coming from a place of empathy, even when discussing someone who's doing something so terrible or saying something so terrible,
I think it's a very interesting way that maybe we as journalists and reporters and hosts can think about approaching these stories, if we have to cover them because they're such big stories. We really kind of try to delve in why. I mean, really, ultimately, it is about, when you're moving at a fast pace, when the news cycle is so quick, it's hard to get to the why. I mean, the business model of journalism does not incentivize that. The first people to be cut in media are investigative reporters who get to the heart of the why. And so maybe we can start to delve into that a little bit more. Why is Trump as hard as it may be, why is Trump behaving this way? What are the incentives behind these folks? And it doesn't necessarily mean like what trauma did they go through. It's literally like, what are the financial incentives behind these actions? You know, are these people being used? Is the evangelical community being taken advantage of because they know that they need those voters and they're being used? Like, what is the incentive behind all of this work? What is the incentive behind Joe Biden, you know, not really having any sort of communication? Is it that he's mentally, what is the incentive behind putting him up? So I think that's important. And that's a very important, you know, you teach journalism. That's part of the ethics of journalism that has completely been lost. And whether or not that was what Michael saw him as from that perspective, I think it's valuable, and it really was. I mean, one last thing I'll say about institutions, because I do think this is by design. Institutions, we've become over-institutionalized as a society, and I think he recognized that. And part of what is going on right now, this chaotic moment, is the failure of institutions and people trying to figure out where they stand in the world as institutions have failed us, and whatever remnants of institutions exist and they still exist, are trying to divide us so that we don't unify. Because unifying means empathy and humanity and being able to push forward a truly progressive humanist agenda that he wanted. And I think he recognized that because he was steeped in the history of it. So it's, maybe, you know, something. Go ahead.
I just don't know how he did it, right? Because he was so well read. Yes. And on top of that, he was checking in with all of us. He had such a connection with so many different people. Like, that takes work, right? It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of emotional, it takes a lot of like the emotion out of you too. Like it's emotional work to constantly check in with people and hear them out and give them a space to vent if they're going through something. And I'm just honored that I got to know him the way that I did, and I'm going to miss him. And I think the only thing that's going to give me solace personally is to just, again, learn from who he was and try to model my own behavior after that.
One lesson, one piece of his legacy that you want to immediately put forward, what would that be?
Kindness. I would say kindness, and kindness toward individuals. And you know, just his whole mission was to unify people in order to fight the elite class. That's really the simplest way of putting it. And I just think it's so important to carry that out, really. In honor of Michael, of course, in honor of his legacy, but also for a better life for all of us. I'm so tired of living like this, you know, and I'm one of the privileged ones. I have a job. I can do my job from home clearly. But, you know, if you're a working person in America or anywhere else in the world, you know, you live in fear. You really do, because it's such an unstable system, and everything can be wiped away, taken away from you for any number of reasons. Your industry can be taken over by robots. You might actually, you know, be the target of one of these online mobs. And yeah, a lot of people have lost their jobs, and people try to minimize it by saying, oh, they'll find another job. You don't know that. And by the way, like, think about how traumatizing it is to lose a job, especially in the middle of this pandemic. So I want to make sure that I keep that kind of stuff in mind and find ways to unify people, even if on some of the major issues we might disagree, right? And there's all sorts of unsavory people in the world, but do they want to fight for economic justice? And if they do, we have a common goal and we need to work together.
Focus on the ideas. That's a big part of this, right? We got to focus on these ideas. Anna, I am so grateful that you've been able to join us today, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he influences your work and others' work and how we can work together. And I am just so deeply, deeply sorry for your loss and for our loss. It's almost too much at this point, but I thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Nomiki, and thanks for having this conversation. It means a lot to me. And, talking about him is part of grieving and mourning and but also celebrating him. So thank you for the conversation. I love you. I love your work. And let's just keep fighting and fighting together.
Thank you to our guest Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks and Jacobin. Thank you to Dorsey, to Callie, to George, to Ruthie. Thank you to Sam Cedar for introducing me and so many of us to Michael. And thank you to Michael and his team, his family, his partner, his friends. Thank you, Michael.